This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
2. Definition. We shall not enter into any of the abstruse definitions of war used by publicists. We shall keep to the element of the thing itself, to a duel. War is nothing but a duel on an extensive scale. If we would conceive as a unit the countless number of duels which make up a war, we shall do so best by supposing to ourselves two wrestlers. Each strives, by a physical force, to compel the other to submit to his will. Each endeavours to throw his adversary, and thus render him incapable of further resistance. War, therefore, is an act of violence intended to compel our opponent to fulfil our will. Violence arms itself with the inventions of art and science in order to contend against violence. Self-imposed restrictions, almost imperceptible and hardly worth mentioning, termed usages of international law, accompany it without essentially impairing its power. Violence, that is to say physical force, for there is no moral force without the conception of states and law, is therefore the means. The compulsory submission of the enemy to our will is the ultimate object. In order to attain this object fully, the enemy must be disarmed, and disarmament becomes therefore the immediate object of hostilities in theory. It takes the place of the final object and puts it aside as something we can eliminate from our calculations. 3. Utmost use of force. Now, philanthropists may easily imagine there is a skillful method of disarming and overcoming an enemy without great bloodshed, and that this is the proper tendency of the art of war. However plausible this may appear, still it is an error which must be extirpated, for in such dangerous things as war, the errors which proceed from a spirit of benevolence are the worst. As the use of physical power to the utmost extent by no means excludes the cooperation of the intelligence, it follows that he who uses force unsparingly, without reference to the bloodshed involved, must obtain a superiority if his adversary uses less vigour in its application. The former then dictates the law to the latter, and both proceed to extremities to which the only limitations are those imposed by the amount of counteracting force on each side. This is the way in which the matter must be viewed, and it is to no purpose, it is even against one's own interest, to turn away from the consideration of the real nature of the affair, because the horror of its elements excites repugnance. If the wars of civilized people are less cruel and destructive than those of savages, the difference arises from the social condition both of states in themselves and in their relations to each other. Out of this social condition and its relations, war arises, and by it war is subjected to conditions, is controlled and modified. But these things do not belong to war itself, they are only given conditions, and to introduce into the philosophy of war itself a principle of moderation would be an absurdity. 2 motives lead men to war: instinctive hostility and hostile intention. In our definition of war, we have chosen as its characteristic the latter of these elements, because it is the most general. It is impossible to conceive the passion of hatred of the wildest description bordering on mere instinct, without combining with it the idea of a hostile intention. On the other hand, hostile intentions may often exist without being accompanied by any, or at all events by any extreme, hostility of feeling. Amongst savages, views emanating from the feelings; amongst civilized nations, those emanating from the understanding, have the predominance. But this difference arises from attendant circumstances, existing institutions, etc., and therefore is not to be found necessarily in all cases, although it prevails in the majority. In short, even the most civilized nations may burn with passionate hatred of each other. We may see from this what a fallacy it would be to refer the war of a civilized nation entirely to an intelligent act on the part of the government, and to imagine it as continually freeing itself more and more from all feeling of passion, in such a way that at last the physical masses of combatants would no longer be required. In reality, their mere relations would suffice, a kind of algebraic action,